So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Chris, who is from DocuSign. He's going to introduce himself to you, and I'll just help you set up the presentation.
Hello? Do I need this, or can you guys hear me back there?
We can hear
Yes?
you.
Okay, I'm going to try to do it without this, if you don't mind. Yin, GlobalSaké, thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited to kind of talk to you about global M&A, just a little bit of my background. So I've been in Silicon Valley for about 15 years. 7 of that was doing investment banking, so advising private and public companies on M&A. I spent a couple years doing private equity as well, so doing on the investment side. And then I've been at DocuSign for 3.5 years. Much of that time was in the strategy corporate development team. And in that time frame, in about 1.5 years, we did 4 acquisitions. 3 of them were international: France, Israel, and Brazil. Not the places I would recommend starting to do acquisitions in. They're definitely hard. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about M&A in general, but also I have a couple key lessons that I kind of wanted to share with you. So again, I call myself a recovering investment banker. Definitely don't want to go back there, no offense to anyone who's doing investment banking. So I think I think it's really important to think about M&A in the context of other growth drivers, right? It's part of your build strategy, part of your partner strategy, and M&A can certainly be a tremendous way to accelerate your growth in your business. At DocuSign, this is definitely something we did around looking globally, and we definitely utilized each one of these pretty aggressively to really grow that business. And the good news is, when I started at DocuSign, international was a really small part of what we did, and today it's just grown really dramatically in the sort of 3.5 years that I've been here. And the partnering one is actually an interesting one. 2 of our acquisitions were partners before we actually acquired them. And so, it's kind of like dating before you get married. It's a great way to get to know somebody and figure out how they work, where the synergies are, where the conflicts might exist. And then that way it's much easier to do that acquisition internally, because a lot of the parts of the organization already know the people, already know the product, and presumably the partnership is going well enough that people see a lot of opportunity to actually kind of combine. Oops. Now I screwed it up. Oops. There we go. So obviously I'm going to focus more on the buy piece of it today, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits and the risk before I get to my 3 key lessons. So there's a couple of key benefits that any company wants to do M&A. These are what should drive some of your decision making. Time to market is a really important one. Obviously, M&A gives you the fastest versus a build or partner type of opportunity. New products, talent, and then really on the financial side, market share and sort of upsell opportunity. So interestingly for DocuSign, when we thought about going global for our business, we had some unique challenges. So we're a signature company, and signatures are done differently in different countries. Different technologies are used. We didn't have the sort of talent in-house to really be able to build that in the time frame in which we wanted to build it. So that was a big reason for some of the acquisitions we did, particularly in Latin America and EMEA, to really gain the knowledge and the product expertise to be able to bring that in-house, build it into our platform, and really be able to serve our customers on a real global basis. Obviously, there are a tremendous amount of risks that go into it. Organizational bandwidth is one that I think gets overlooked pretty often. Doing M&A takes a lot of time and resources, and it's not just at the executive level, but it's actually throughout the entire organization, and even more so at the front line folks. And so from a planning perspective, from an execution perspective, and particularly just from an accountability perspective, you want to make sure that there's the right amount of prioritization around this in order to be successful. Yin was saying, there's a tendency to chase the next shiny object. M&A is a great example of that. People love to kind of chase the next shiny thing and want to do acquisitions, because oftentimes they're not the ones that kind of have to deal with it. Integration execution, I would say this is where most deals actually fail. This is where all the benefits that you realize don't come true because you haven't done the planning and you haven't put the resources into that execution side of things, which can be pretty time consuming and just take a lot of work. On the cash and equity constraints, again, this is really around, you have limited amount of resources, right? So there's huge opportunity costs in terms of making an acquisition. So you need to make sure that you're putting those resources in the best way possible and that you don't sort of squander the limited resources that you have. The last two kind of talk to the logistics and the cultural alignment. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but obviously when you talk about acquisitions, two companies can operate very, very differently, have very strong cultures. It becomes even more acute as you think about M&A and how do you sort of ingest that company into your own. It can be sometimes easier if you're a sales force and you're buying a small startup. The closer you get to the similar size of companies, the more challenge that becomes culturally, because you have a lot of personalities that are involved. And then lastly, logistics, language. There's a reason why there's a lot of serial acquirers out there. We don't like acquiring outside of where they have an office, right? From a development perspective, it can be challenging to have teams in different places. And so that can be an issue when you think about M&A, particularly for smaller companies. All right, so lesson number one for me is, what is M&A? And I actually think M&A is different to different people. I think for execs, they think it's sort of the next best thing. Again, a little chasing the shiny object. I think for investors, they see this as a growth opportunity, right? How to kind of grow top line, this is great. I want you to go do this. And so, the next best thing is going to be your business. Who doesn't want to do M&A? How could it be so bad? I actually think for everyone else, it's just messy and hard, right? I mean, it is, thinking about having to integrate people, process, technology into your own people, process, and technology in a really tight time frame. And oh, by the way, do your day job at the same time, right? So it's, anyone who says M&A is easy has never done M&A before. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to look at my notes for a minute. Okay, so lesson number two, be proactive, not reactive. Rarely are the best companies that you want to acquire the ones that reach out to you for the first time. It's usually the ones that are the result of sort of targeted outreach for you. And so there's two components of this in my mind. One is a lot of extensive planning, and the other is just collaborative execution. So, on the planning side, again, M&A should be part of a real deliberate strategy that sort of serves your overall strategic objectives as a company. And that can often be as much about what you will do as much as what you won't do as a company. And so, make sure that, again, you're not chasing the shiny object. M&A has too much risk to really just do it sort of haphazardly, right? It's one thing to kind of have a couple people do a side project and see how it goes. It's another thing to devote millions of dollars of resources, of equity, of dilution to all the shareholders, and have a deal go pretty poorly. So, and the other thing around planning is just do your due diligence, right? There's a lot of cases around companies that have just done that too quickly. I know we have Brent Dorn people here as well. Make sure you do your accounting due diligence. Make sure you do your market due diligence, right? There's just some great examples of deals that have not gone very well because of that. HP Autonomy, it was an $11 billion deal. Now they're sort of mired in lawsuits because there's some accounting diligence that they didn't do really well. On the execution side, again, this talks to, I think, Yin was saying, just being operationally ready to do M&A. And for a lot of companies, most people in the organizations have never done M&A. So there's a huge education process that I found, certainly at DocuSign, and I've heard other places, around educating people on what it means to do diligence, what it means to do integration planning. And so that's, I think really important to make sure that your organization is prepared. And I think you want to be prepared before you actually do the deal because you need that time to start educating people around it. And it's also important to know that the whole integration part of a deal happens long before you close the deal, right? You should be thinking about how am I going to integrate this product, these people, before you kind of sign those final papers. It's actually part of your diligence process, right? How do you think about how can you really do diligence on a company without knowing what the end state really looks like for your business? And the reality is, if you do it well, there's some great things that happen, but there's so many times where if you do an acquisition really poorly, instead of all the benefits you get, now you have a whole ton of problems, right? So instead of having this, we're gonna grow top line, we're gonna have this new product into the market, it's gonna be great, now you have a whole bunch of people that you've brought on board, you have to figure out what they're gonna do, you have a product that you need to support and maintain. It can actually be a huge drain on the organization versus a huge benefit. And so the last lesson I really had was really just that lessons 1 and 2 are much harder to think about. And there's just a couple of 3 things I'll just sort of hit on pretty high level. Just from a regulatory standpoint, we did a deal in France, and in France they have something called a work council. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it. A work council is, a lot of companies above a certain size, I think, have a work council. It's sort of like a union made up of just employees. And they actually have the ability to stop any deal, any acquisition that the company is going to make. So again, something to be thoughtful of as you think about doing M&A. There's some of, every country has a little bit of this, maybe not to the degree France does, but more regulations you have to deal with. The other one is just logistical. We did a deal in Israel, as I mentioned earlier. And I didn't know this at the time, but their work week is Sunday through Thursday, right? So now you immediately cut down 20% of the time that you have overlap with them. From San Francisco, they're about 10 hours ahead. So the amount of hours you actually have to work and actually talk with people in Israel is really small in the course of a week. And that just makes things a lot more challenging to do because you have so little time to be able to actually talk with them. And of course, the last one is sort of cultural, right? Everything from negotiating a deal is different for different countries. How they confront problems, how they deal with problems can be very different. So the deal we did in Brazil, which was our first international deal, we actually had some Brazilian people that worked here, and we put together a presentation to kind of share with people in the organization around just etiquette, business etiquette, how they do business down there. When you go down there, what you should do, what you should not do. Japan is obviously another great example of that. There's a strong business culture there, so you obviously want to be really respectful. And that's not just M&A, obviously that's any type of business dealings you do. But in the context of M&A, you have some unique challenges, personalities, negotiations that really come into play. Also on the cultural side, obviously there's language barriers, and I remember doing a lot of the international deals, and we had a terrible phone system at the time. So think about people that don't speak English very well. You're talking slow to begin with. It's breaking up. You have short time zones to talk with someone. Every conference call takes at least twice as long, and then you're doing them again because people didn't really understand what you're talking about in the first place. So there's just, again, this is just all the challenges we face here around M&A just become exceptionally harder as you think about in the global space. So I've spoken a lot about sort of the gotchas and the pitfalls here, things not to do, but I certainly don't want to be, discourage anyone around doing M&A. I've been doing it for a long time, and I can certainly see the tremendous amount of benefits that I can bring to organizations. It can be a really wonderful thing. And even though at times it can feel pretty awful, like really bad, I will say in terms of my career, there are a few highs for me around being able to do, find a company to acquire, do the diligence, negotiate the deal, sign it, do the integration, and then you actually start to see the huge benefits of the acquisition. And so, again, even though it can be really hard, it can be like a really, really great feeling. And we all know about some of these great deals that have happened, right? Things like YouTube and Instagram and Android. But I kind of spent a lot of this presentation talking about the things to be careful of, because you rarely hear about all the bad deals that happen, right? Over 50% of M&A deals actually fail, right? So we know it's hard, we know it's not easy, because we know the stats around it. So if there's any sort of final lesson that I have, it's not don't do M&A, but I think it's just be really thoughtful and deliberate about how you do M&A. Anyway, that's it.